everyone. Welcome back to the Ministry Leaders Podcast, episode 13. We're a podcast aimed at equipping local church leaders and ministry leaders to better serve their ministries and churches, whether you're an elder, a vestry member, a deacon or a trustee, a small group leader, or on pastoral staff. The early church was a vibrant and potent community who absolutely transformed the world over the first few centuries after Jesus came. Now, they weren't perfect. They were very human, just like us. But have you ever wondered, maybe as you read the book of Acts, what made them so much more alive, so much more spiritually powerful than the version of church that we so often experience? As leaders, it's absolutely vital that we don't stop asking that question, that we come back to it again and again. And the answer primarily has to do with their reliance on the power of the Holy Spirit, the level of their faith and their expectation in God, and their deep commitment to Jesus. But also on a more practical level, I'd like to point out one other factor that's all the more important for us right now as we're all seeking to adjust to the new reality of the coronavirus epidemic. And to grasp this reality about the early church, I want you to think with me for a minute about a hermit crab. Yeah, those little sea critters that don't put energy into creating their own shells like most crabs do, but rather they borrow an abandoned shell that they find and they live in that. They move into the shell and that's their home until they outgrow it. Then when they do, they cast it aside and they upgrade to a bigger shell. So let's think about what makes a crab. It's got a living body and it's got a hard shell, and both are absolutely necessary. Without the crab, you just have a dead shell. But without the shell, the living crab can't survive. It needs protection from predators and turbulent waters. You know, churches are the same. We are a living organism made up of people, of relationships, a common culture, vision, and values, but we also have an organization that acts like a shell. Maybe a building, bylaws, staff, policies, bank accounts, all the practicalities that we need to function. Like our hermit crab, the life is in the organism, but the shell, the organization, allows that life to flourish. Here's what I find in too many churches, though. We spend the majority of our time focused on the shell, the organization, and not nearly enough on the organism where the real spiritual life is. And this is a mistake the early church didn't make. And I think it's one reason that they were so vibrant and potent. You see, they were like a hermit crab. Instead of putting lots of energy into building a shell, an organization, they just moved into a shell that was already there. In their case, it was the Greco-Roman household. Greco-Roman households were not nuclear families like we think about today. You could have 10 or 20 or even 40 people living in an ancient Greco-Roman household. There were children, there were cousins, grandparents, slaves, business partners. And the household was where everyone worked as well as lived. Maybe they made pottery as a family, as a household. Maybe they wove cloth. Maybe they sold food. And so managing an ancient household was like managing an organization. It had to have a budget. It had roles, job descriptions. It had a building, quite a sizable one sometimes. It had policies and procedures of sorts. All the organization was already there in the Greco-Roman household. And so instead of reinventing the wheel and developing their own organization, the church, the organism of the church, just moved into the shell of the household. Why duplicate much of what was needed for the organization of the church when it was already there in place? Already all that stuff was being done anyway. And so the focus of the leadership of the church and the life of the church could be on the organism more so than on the organization. It could be on the people, on their spiritual growth, on their mission and their outreach to their communities. Now, there are house churches who still function this way today, but most churches that I know have their own elaborate, separate organizations with their own budget, their own buildings, their own staffs, their own policies. And the organization takes so much work and energy to run and maintain, often there's not enough energy left to put into nurturing the spiritual life of the organism. Well, this pandemic that we're going through now is forcing us to make some adjustments to our organizational structures on the fly, right? And maybe there's an opportunity here because all of a sudden the shell we've worked so hard to create isn't working for us so well anymore. We can't use our buildings for much. We can't hold our services in person. We can't run many of our programs. For many of our staff and our volunteer leaders, half of our job description is no longer relevant. And meanwhile, we have new responsibilities. Well, here's our temptation if we're organizationally focused. It's to do everything we can as quickly as we can to rebuild a new organization, a new shell, primarily online, right? But what about the organism? What about the people? What about the relationships? What about the spiritual life of our body and the lives of our people and what they're going through right now? Do we as leaders have any time or energy left to focus on that? Now, granted, we can't avoid organization altogether, nor should we. What I'm saying is that we can't let our organizational concerns dominate. We've got to allocate enough energy and attention to the organism. So what if, like a hermit crab, we looked around for existing organizational structures to do some of that job for us, the organizational part, the shell part? And there's no one-size-fits-all strategy for what this can look like. It takes creativity. It takes maybe spotting something that's there that can be used. But let me just share what I've seen in recent days and weeks a few different churches do. Example 1. When it comes to kids ministry, what about empowering families? Parents, relatives, caregivers, they're the primary influencers of our kids anyway, and with schools closed, they have more time with kids than ever. What about finding creative ways to resource parents and caregivers and to equip them to disciple their kids at home? Example 2, when it comes to providing support and care for people during this time, what about enlisting already existing friend groups and small groups? Rather than leaders or staff having to check up on and care for everyone in the church, what if you ask everyone in the church to pick up their phone and reach out to 5 people in the church that they know best every week or two to see how they're doing and to ask if they need anything? Sure, there are some people for the staff still to cover who will fall through the cracks that way. But think of how many would be cared for that way and how it would reduce the burden on leaders. And if anyone does call a friend or someone in their small group and they become aware of a need that's bigger than they can handle, they can always alert church leaders to that with the permission of that person. All right, example 3. When it comes to outreach, what one church did was provide everyone in their church with basic instructions for how to write a letter and drop it off on the door of each neighbor in their neighborhood, inviting that person to connect with the rest of the neighborhood on a social media group for care, for connection, and even for prayer when opportunities presented itself. Again, the goal is not to build a whole new organizational component when an existing one will already do the trick, in order to free up time and energy for nurturing the life of the organism, the people, and the relationships in your church. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Ministry Leaders Podcast. We're a new podcast, so if you appreciate this, please let people know about it. Subscribe on your iPhone or Google Play or however you access the podcast. Give us a rating, write us a review. It only takes a minute. We'd appreciate you spreading the word. Bye for now.